Hello guys, today we are going to look at how to name organic compounds. We start with some rules. Okay, the first rule is to identify the carbon chain with the longest number of carbon atoms. I am going to explain this later when we start doing examples. The second rule is to number the carbon atoms on the longest carbon chain from left to right and from right to left. The third rule is to name the groups attached to the longest carbon chain, indicating the number of groups present and their position on the longest carbon chain. And the fourth rule is to choose the technique suitable for your compound. If it is a simple organic compound, you use this approach. The first part will be the number of carbon atoms, the middle part of the name will be the types of bond present, and the last part being the functional group. But if it is a complex organic compound, the first part of the name will be the position of the attachment. The second part will be the attachment itself, and the third part will be the longest carbon chain.
And the fifth rule is to follow alphabetical order when there are more than one type of attachment present.
And you also need to know that you use met for one carbon atom, et for two carbon atoms, prop for three carbon atoms, but for four carbon atoms, pent for five carbon atoms, hex for six carbon atoms, hept for seven carbon atoms, and oct for eight carbon atoms. And for the types of bond present, you use An when the compound contains only single carbon to carbon bonds, and when the compound contains double carbon to carbon bonds, then you use En. And when the compound contains carbon to carbon triple bonds, you use Yn. And finally, the functional groups. When the compound is a hydrocarbon, you use the letter E at the end. If it is an alcohol, you use the letters Ol. If it is an aldehyde, you use the letters Al. If it is a ketone, then you use the letters One. If it is a carboxylic acid, the name must end with oic acid. And if it is an amine, your naming must end with amine. Okay, now we are going to be looking at some examples on how to name simple organic compounds. And remember, we are going to apply all these rules we explained behind here. The first rule says identify the carbon chain with the longest number of carbon atoms. This is the longest carbon chain here with the longest number of carbon atoms from this carbon here to this carbon. So we have identified the longest carbon chain. This is it here. The second rule says number the carbon atoms on the longest carbon chain from left to right and from right to left. So you have to number them. We start from the top here. You number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This from left to right. Now from right to left. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So we are done with rule number 2. Now rule number 3 says name the groups attached to the longest carbon chain, indicating the number of groups present with tri, di, tetra or anything, and their position on the longest carbon chain. This is the longest carbon chain here, already numbered, and there is no attachment on it. Remember, hydrogen atoms are not attachments. You get me? So there's no attachment here, so this step does not apply here. And for the fourth rule, you know that for simple organic compounds, the first part of the name must be what? Number of carbon atoms. The second part, types of bond present. Third part, the functional group. When it is 5 carbon atoms, the name is pent. So you write the first part of the name, for the second part of the name we have types of bond present. Remember, you need to check the types of bond present, whether they are single carbon to carbon bonds, double bonds or triple bonds. Here all carbon to carbon bonds are single, so you use AN for the second part of the name, AN. And then for the last part of the name that indicates the functional group, we have what? E, when it is a hydrocarbon. This compound is a hydrocarbon. Why? Because it contains only carbon and hydrogen. So we put E. Now the second compound, we follow the same rules as explained earlier. The first part of the name is what? The number of carbon atoms. How many carbon atoms are present here? Just one. There's only one carbon atom present, so there's no double bonds, there's no triple bond, so it must be a single bond. So we take AN. And then for the final part of the name that shows the functional group, the compound contains the OH functional group, which is present for alcohols. So the name must end with ol. That's that. For the third compound, we follow the same rules. Identify the longest carbon chain from here to here. This is it here. Second rule, number the carbon atoms from left to right and from right to left. So we number that 1, 2, and then 1, 2. Name the groups attached and everything. There's no group here attached to this longest carbon chain. And remember, I said hydrogen is not an attachment, so it's not counted. So what is the name? There are 2 carbon atoms. Remember, 2 carbon atoms is what? Is called Earth. Now, types of bond present. Types of bond present. The types of bond present here are called carbon to carbon triple bonds. So the name must contain a YN. So it's ethane. And it's a hydrocarbon because it contains only carbon and hydrogen. So you put the E. Then for the fourth compound, the fourth compound is this and contains, you number the carbon atoms. 1 2, then 1 2. It has 2 carbon atoms, so it must be an 8. It has only single carbon to carbon bonds, so the middle part must be ethane, and it has a carboxylic functional group. This here is a carboxylic functional group, so it is a carboxylic acid and the name must end with oic acid. And for the last part, number the carbon atoms and you give the name 1 2 3 4 from left to right and from right to left. And he has 4 carbons, so your name will start with but. And he has carbon single bonds, so he must have an AN. And he has the ketone functional group, so he must have ON.